Hey everyone, my name's Lily and I'm the book blogger behind Utopia State of Mind, and today I'm going to bring you my October wrap-up. If you hear a fan noise, it's because my oven's on, I'm heating up lunch. I need to film this before lunch because I need to take my makeup off. Anyway, these are some of the physical books I read in October. Last TBR, I forgot to hold it up, so my bad. But I remember this time, here they are. In total, I read 33 books in October. I feel that a lot. September though, with 42, I'm pretty sure that was the number from September. Like, wow. Okay, so 33 still felt like a lot. In fact, a lot of the months I read and I'm like, oh, it doesn't feel like that many, and then it ends up being a lot. Whereas October, I was like, whoa, I feel like it's a lot, and then it ended up not being as much as I thought, considering September I thought that it wasn't a lot, and then it was a lot. Anyway, I read 33 books. 57% of those had POC main characters. 30% of those had queer main characters. Not exactly on for queer main characters, but my TBR for November seems to have a lot of queer characters, and at least my TBR for next week has a lot of queer books, so I feel pretty good about that. Let me just talk about the favorite books that I had in October. I had a bunch of favorite books in October. Overall, I feel like October was like such a good quality reading month. I'm very, very happy with it. I feel like September was a little bit up and down, but October, so many good ones from start to finish, so many sequels that I really enjoyed. But these are like the recommendations I have that I sincerely love with my whole heart. So let's just start off with the first one. It's actually a YA nonfiction. I don't read a lot of nonfiction. I don't read a lot of YA nonfiction, but it's African Icons. African Icons is this YA nonfiction which basically tries to decolonize what people know about the history of Africa before slavery, which is just amazing. I knew from the premise alone that I was really gonna love it, but then I ended up really loving it. Obviously, when I read it, it mixes this really great storytelling voice and this idea of history coming alive. So Tracy Baptiste has a really great way of making, of telling the stories and then just making them have so much life in them. And it's interesting because as I was taking notes, I was like, oh, she's making the stories come alive. But then I realized history is just a bunch of stories, basically. Anyway, I really loved the premise. I loved reading about it. There are illustrations, there are maps. It was fantastic. Highly recommend to people who are looking for either books for themselves to kind of decolonize what you know about African history before slavery, or also for the young readers, which is kind of I guess it's an intended audience. So next I want to also talk about one adult read that I really loved, which is Hollywood Heroine. This is the latest in the Heroine Complex series by Sarah Kuhn. I love this series so much. I've loved it from the very beginning, basically. But Hollywood Heroine has to be my favorite one. It was such a standout one for me because I felt like the main character, Aveda, her struggles, trying to figure out oh, I need to be on top of everything, and because of that, I'm running myself into the ground. I'm burning the candle on both ends. I feel really self-conscious about how I'm able to provide for the people I love, and so I'm just gonna kind of burn myself down. That is me to a T. I loved that so much. I loved her kind of having to figure out the importance of taking care of herself and the importance of realizing that if you're not taking care of yourself, you can't take care of anyone else. I've said that to myself all the time, but it just never goes in. So I loved that aspect. And the second aspect I really loved is that Hollywood Heroine really delves deeply into this idea of being a heroine of color. So being a super heroine of color, basically. And this idea that the world and the racist world essentially is going to want to pull you down, and you have to have this perfection, this standard of perfection. That is something I've loved the entire Hollywood Heroine Complex series, but I felt in Hollywood Heroine it is most deeply delved into the internalized racism, the internalized way that people will talk to you, and you'll excuse it, but no, that's racist essentially. So I love those two aspects of it, and so that's why it's my favorite one of the series so far. Now I want to talk about 3 YA contemporaries that I really, really loved. The first one is Our Way Back to Always, which is a second chance romance meets childhood crush, essentially. Basically, these two best friends had a falling out, and so basically a lot of series events has kind of come together to pull them back in each other's orbit, and it forces them to reevaluate not only what happened between them and how they can kind of figure out, make amends essentially, but also the person that they've become in this distance and the changes in their life. They're dealing with grief, they're dealing with processing loss essentially, and so basically they're trying to figure out how we can live our dreams and like who do we live our dreams for, right? Why are we motivated for our future, and who is behind those motivations? Both of the main characters really struggle with that, trying to figure out like what people would want for them, what they want for themselves. So I felt like since they're about to prepare to go to college, I felt like that was really relatable and fantastic for white audiences to read, this kind of like transitionary period at the very end basically of high school. I thought having to delve with expectations, family expectations, loss as well, all of those things felt really relatable. And also just like their banter and the dual perspective nature of this book, it just was so cute and precious and charming. I'm really excited that this one was pushed to my TBR. I realized I could have been holding the book up the entire time because I had a physical ARC and it wasn't sent to me. This was given to me by a bookseller friend, and so I was like, oh, I don't know if I should read it. I have so many things on my October TBR, just like drowning in my October TBR. But a lovely author bumped it up to my TBR and was like, you have to read this one, and so I did and I loved it. So I'm just really happy about that one. The next one is Everything Within and In Between. This is a book featuring a biracial main character. What I really loved is not only how much this book delves into being biracial, but also specifically being white passing, and what this like complex relationship with not only identity, but also like the way that people treat you differently than your family based on your skin color. And based on the fact that you're white passing. I thought that was incredibly nuanced, incredibly complex, and I love that aspect so much. I have not read that many things like it, except for maybe Color Me In, which also is just like, I love that one so much. I feel like this one was so fantastic because, as I said, I don't read that many books like it, and so I felt like this was really standout in that opinion. But also, it really talks about calling out your friends too, which I think is so hard, especially when you're biracial and you face a lot of erasure from both sides of your identity, and also when you're white passing and you're not really sure if your internalized racism is making you also kind of have these microaggressions, like responsible for microaggressions against other people, but also that you tolerate it in other people, and you have to really interrogate how you feel and also interrogate like yourself and the people around you. So I loved that aspect. And also Everything Within and In Between also talks about a mother and daughter relationship, which is like heartbreaking essentially, but it talks about family that chooses you. So not only this idea that family is blood, and that's kind of like the obligation choice, not with that, but that it's so important about family that chooses you, that shows up for you, that consistently makes you their priority, that like loves you but also shows up for you essentially. And so that theme within Everything Within and In Between, as well as this heavy exploration of identity, I loved those two elements, and so that's why it was on this video, obviously. And the final one is When We Were Them. This one, it was emotionally gripping, right? So it's basically about this friendship mistake. The main character has done something. We don't know what it is when we start reading this book. She's done something. And so basically, When We Were Them keeps going back in time and saying when we were 15, when we were 16, when we were 17. And so from a writing perspective, it really delves into those things where it's like an avalanche, right? An avalanche happens, and then you're really looking at, okay, but then this was the first stone, this was the second one, and in a way that when it was happening, you didn't really recognize that it was happening. You didn't know it was essentially like another straw on the camel's back, and then all of a sudden it just breaks, and you don't know why. And so the main character really has to delve into looking at all these cracks that form that you didn't notice when it happened. And it's also a lot of soul searching and really reflecting about, what did I do to cause this? Where did I go wrong? What happened? When did this start? And it's never a simple answer. So When We Were Them is emotionally gripping in that sense, but by the time we find out what happened, I like gasped aloud. I was so shocked. I did not anticipate it coming. And so basically it talks about friendship, but it also talks a little bit about those friends that like become so ingrained in you that when they start to leave, or they start to have different dreams, or they start to kind of to grow and change, you're just not sure what to do. Like, you feel like a part of you is leaving. And I felt like When We Were Them is so great at not only unpacking mistakes and forgiveness, but also self-discovery and realizing where you and the line between where you and your friends stop, essentially. I feel like when you're a teen, these lines are so blurred because you're growing up with them. You've seen them at their worst, at their best. You've seen them in a way that you don't really see other people as you grow older, because you're not necessarily spending like 9 to 5 with people. You're not growing, you're not changing, you're not making mistakes with them. In the teen years, I feel like you're making so many mistakes. You're having this experience that is really hard to replicate and is really hard to share with other people. And so I just felt like When We Were Them was just emotionally gutting in the best way, if that makes any sense. And I had 4 YA fantasies that I absolutely adored. So the first one, which is my latest like obsession essentially, is Little Thieves. Little Thieves as the ambitious heroine character, so much justice. I freaking love Vanya. She is just mercurial, ambitious, and she tries hard, but she has so much vulnerability in her as well. Like, there isn't just this kind of naked greed that you may see on the surface. There's all sorts of things going on behind the surface. Her trauma, her vulnerability, her hurts, her fears, her doubts. It's a Goose Girl retelling. And so what I really loved about Little Thieves is it also really delves into this idea that like nobility are generally kind of just not great. You know, that scratches the surface. And so it delves into looking at this difference of privilege and this idea of friendship, and this also idea of people not realizing that they are being very awful to each other, and also thinking that, oh, they'll change, we're gonna get through this. And when that doesn't happen, that crushing kind of, you have to become colder to survive because no one will take care of you, no one will protect you, no one will advocate for you. Like, it just got me so much. Vanya is my favorite part of Little Thieves. I'm so excited that there's now going to be another story in the world of Vanya. It's a sequel, so you definitely should read the first one. But I really loved that, and also the writing is so snarky and unique and just fun and hilarious. I loved that it was like #1 on YA hilarious like YA stories, which is so interesting because it's a story about a curse where Vanya has to make amends or else she basically turns into the product of her greed. And it's also a story about love and friendship and second chances and forgiveness, but then it's in hilarious YA books because the tone is just light, but also not being afraid to delve into the harder, grittier parts of ourselves and our ambitions and motivations. But it's just fun. Like, it is fun. It made me laugh. It made me smile so much reading it, and it made the pages just breeze by. The next one is Within These Wicked Walls. I did not like Jane Eyre when I read it. I really did not like it. I don't like it still. So I was really nervous about Within These Wicked Walls because I was like, ooh, I want to love this. I love this African-inspired I love this African-inspired fantasy. I love this idea of a retelling, and I wanted to love it, and I did. I loved it because it addresses all the things that I really hated about Jane Eyre, right? So first of all, Rochester is like awkward, adorkable basically, and he's not as like blatantly manipulative, I feel like, as in Jane Eyre, where it's kind of like, in Jane Eyre, I kept thinking, why are you staying? Like, what is drawing you to Rochester? I did not understand. But in this one, you can see that there is like a humanity and a vulnerability to Rochester, which I just did not get in the original. And then secondly, I felt like Jane Eyre has this supernatural gothic feeling to it in a lot of places, but Within These Wicked Walls delves so deep into that. It has like exorcisms and ghosts and hauntings. Like, it just made the fantasy element just so much more prevalent than it is, I felt like, in the original, and I loved it. I ended up really loving it, and it was funny because I was talking to someone and they're like, yeah, I'm not sure if I want to read Within These Wicked Walls because I didn't really like Jane Eyre. And I was like, hold up. I will explain to you why you will like Within These Wicked Walls, even though you didn't like Jane Eyre. And I did it, basically. The next one is A Rush of Wings. This is another retelling. This is a Seven Swans retelling, and I love the Seven Swans. It is one of my favorite stories. I would like retellings of it like all over the place. I love it because it talks about losing your voice, and it talks about like what you'll do for the people you love. I was gonna say it talks about suffering, which like doesn't sound really great when I'm like, oh, I loved it because there's so much suffering. But I loved it in the fact that in some fairy tales, there's not very clear sense of sacrifice or the cost of things. And I felt like in Seven Swans, it is entirely apparent, basically, what the cost of things are, right? And so what I really loved about A Rush of Wings is not only did it honor the elements that I loved from the original, but I also really loved that it talks about family in such a beautiful way, especially because I felt like the interactions with the brothers in the story were just so fantastic. Basically, if you didn't know, Seven Swans was basically like this woman who I think is like a stepmother figure, essentially, ends up cursing the girl and her brothers. I think in the original there are like 7 of them. And they turn into swans during the day, and then at night they're like humans. And basically the main character doesn't have a voice, so she can't tell anyone what's happened. And the only way that she can save her brothers and turn them back into humans is that she has to knit these sweaters that are made of like essentially just prickles, like essentially all thorns. So it's incredibly hard for her, incredibly painful, and she's suffering in silence. And then basically at the end, I think like they think that she's a witch, I think, in the original one. And so she's on this pyre and she brings the shirts with her, and the swans are running, like flying around her basically. And then she's throwing the shirts to them, and so they eventually turn into all humans, but one of them she doesn't finish, and the sleeve isn't. And I think in the original, I think he stays like a swan in the arm basically, but the rest of him is human. I don't know. That's the bare bones of the story. What I loved about A Rush of Wings is that it honors these elements, but what I also really loved is that it definitely changes this kind of stepmother trope in it, so you have to read it to find out. But like, I love that it wasn't just like, oh, the stepmother comes in and she's like super, super evil and she wants to steal all this stuff. No, it's much more complex, and I really loved the twist in A Rush of Wings. But I think what I love the most is that at the very beginning, the main character is very quick-tempered and fiery, and she's like very quick to anger, basically. So if like someone insults her in the street, she like nudges them, or she's reactionary. And I feel like that quality is frowned upon for girls, to be like quick-tempered and for them to be quick to anger. And in the book, it is viewed that way. They're like, okay, I want to teach you magic because you have magic, but you need to calm down, right? You need to control your emotions. And what I really loved about A Rush of Wings is that it really delves into that. It examines this idea of anger being a strength, and this idea of like not needing to do that, not needing to moderate your emotions like that, and that being wrong. Like essentially it's wrong that people do that. So really, really love that because I'm quick to anger. You know, I'm one of those people. And so I saw myself a lot in the main character, and that's, I guess, why I really loved A Rush of Wings. And the final one is Year of the Reaper. This is the latest book from Miquia Lussiere. I loved Year of the Reaper, sorry, so much because it blends murder mystery / assassination attempt mystery and fantasy so well, so seamlessly. It features 2 main characters, and the first one is this kind of ray of sunshine, very curious, like, oh, I'm on an adventure kind of historian character, which I freaking love. She was so precious. And on the other side, you have this like gruff exterior character who is just so deeply scarred by what happened to him, and you know, his role in the mystery essentially. And you see their banter and the ways, not only that their chemistry and their dynamic, but the ways that they're able to help each other process those issues, help each other work through their own trauma and their own questions. And I just loved it so much. And the murder mystery, assassination mystery element was so fantastic. There were all of these shocks which I did not expect, essentially. And then one of those things where I just kept reading faster and faster to kind of figure out what was happening. I loved it so much. I feel like Miquia Lussiere's books always blur this line between murder mystery-ish kind of thing and fantasy so well. I love them so much because of that. And so this one just delivered everything that I thought it was going to be, with even more character love, basically. I love them so much. I think that they're honestly my favorite ones. So that brings me to the end of this October wrap-up. It was a big one, but I had a lot of fun. I had read a lot of books. I'm hoping to start hitting the brakes as we get to the end of the year, start preparing for 2022. I'm hoping that November hits the brakes in a big way. But if you saw my November TBR, you'll kind of see some of my mental state. But yeah, I feel good about October, but I'm really looking forward to slowing a lot down in November, hopefully, and even more so in December. So I hope that you will let me know down below what your favorite book of October was, or if you have any feedback on any of the books that I mentioned. And I will see you in the next one. Bye!